Okay, this is going to be the real quick version of it, of the composition lecture that I gave in class, or the lesson I gave in class. And so we're just going to quickly go over some of these and take a look at them. The goal for this is for you to understand the 9 different elements of, or 9 different composition rules they'd like you to know for advanced digital photography. And now I use this both for my basic digital photography and advanced digital photography. The basic digital photography only says it has 3 on the state standards. However, I think it's important, we'll just go over all 9, and you'll get the other 3 are inside of these 9, and so it's important that you understand all of them. Now the first one is called simplicity and emphasis. Now the thing I like about this one is it makes it, you have your subject, and well, let me back up. The goal for you is to tell your viewer how to look at a photograph. And so when they look at your work, you're actually going to influence them on how they look at it. That way you can tell a story through it, or that way you can have your subject pop out. And so as we do this, I want you to be thinking how you're going to create that, and you're going to use these elements of composition. So the first one is simplicity and emphasis. Now, there's not much around it. There's just the subject. Now, granted, there is a sky and there are clouds, but most of the time, your eye stays upon the stop sign. We have the same thing here. The background's very plain, not much to look at, but it adds some interest to it. You can use the background still to help create the story, but on simplicity and emphasis, you want the viewer's eye to go to your subject. And they've done that on several different ways. One way is by having it very plain, and the other one is having a bright color in there, and the eye goes to that. Same way with that one right there. Okay, simplicity and emphasis. Even though that there's a lot of texture and a lot of things going on inside of that with the grass, it's very simplistic, and the emphasis are upon the shoes. But yet the background still adds to the scene. And so it adds to the feeling of it. Okay, we've got the same thing here. Okay, the next one's called the rule of thirds. If you take the picture and you put a tic-tac-toe line on it, something that looks like that, you'll notice that these are on the third lines. So we've got this going across here, that's a third line, that going across there, that's a third line, but we also have them divided left and right. That's a third line, and that's a third line. Now, so a little tic-tac-toe. Where they intersect, I call those a sweet spot, because you are on 2 different third lines. You're horizontally and vertically on the third lines. And so if you'll put your subject on the third lines, you'll be following the rule of thirds. Now, rule of thirds is one, for me, it's one of the most important ones that you can follow, because it adds a lot of interest to it. You'll see on some of these things. Okay, so let's go back. Let's look at this one. Now this is one that follows the rule of thirds. It's on the third line. Now this one I think is rather interesting, because we have the third lines right here. The red of that is on the sweet spot. We have the third lines right there, but we also have a third line kind of coming across here of the horizon. Okay, now also on the rule of thirds, it doesn't have to be exactly on the third line, but you try to do that. Okay. For some reason, this is just a very fun one for me to look at. The photographer here is shooting at dusk. They've got a flash going, but it's just there's a lot of interest to me. I just love this one. And then here we have the sweet spot. Notice how this is not on the third line, which is kind of interesting. That right there is still split in half, but because we have that right there, your third line, I love that one. Okay, I'll try to go a little bit faster because I do want this to be a shorter video. So here's another rule of thirds. Notice how the goat's on the third line. Okay, same thing here. We have 2 different things on the third lines, or on the sweet spots. We have your subject right down here. We also have another point of interest right up here on the sweet spot. And like I said, it's not exact, but it's close. And so you don't have to be exact on this, but you do need to be close. Okay, the next one is perspective. Now there's 2 different ways that people describe this. I don't like the way it's described in the Utah State Core on the perspective. And so there's two different kind of perspectives that I see. One of them is art, and that's kind of the angle that you look at it. You notice how this gives it perspective because the lines go into a vanishing point. Everything kind of follows that. Okay, this is perspective in the art world. Now, the way they describe it in the photography, um, they talk about perspective being kind of your angle of view, and they use a lot of mergers to use that. Yeah. Here's what I'm going to tell you. When I want you to shoot perspective, I want you just to change the angle. I want you to get up low or get down low, like it's a bug's eye view or a dog's eye view. What would they see the world as? Or the other thing would be a bird's eye view. I want you to get up high. So I just want you to change the perspective that way, being you're looking at it from someone else's perspective. But here they talk about perspective in the state core as kind of the mergers, which is one of their other ones, is saying avoiding mergers is one of their elements of composition, which, yeah, I won't get on I'll get off my soapbox. So perspective, I just want you to get up a little high, get down low. Okay. The next one, another one that is really important, are called leading lines, and there are a couple different kinds of leading lines. Um, there's actual leading lines, and this is an actual leading line. And I don't know if I have any examples of the other one, the implied leading lines. But the actual leading lines are where they actually have the lines moving through, causing the viewer's eye to move through the photograph to look at your subject. Okay, now the subject is the moon, but all of this other stuff adds to the feeling of it. It adds to the story of it. And so the leading lines will lead them through it, kind of like a storybook. Yeah, you start at the beginning, you end at the end. You're going to do the kind of the same thing. Okay, more leading lines. Leading lines and rule of thirds, I think, are two of the most important that you're going to learn out of this. Okay, again, just leads your eye right through it. I'm not sure where this is, but it looks like Tuscany to me, which is the countryside in Italy. Okay, more leading lines. It leads right down to the subject. Okay, now the other one I told you about is called an implied line, and I don't have any of these leading lines that are implied lines, but that would be like looking at something. That causes people's eye to look. Where are they looking? Where's the subject looking? And it'll cause their eye to go through the photograph because someone's looking that way. You want to see what's going on. And so even though there's not an actual line from their eye to what they're looking at, they're looking that way, and there's an implied line. But leading lines, that's how you can get the photograph, or that's how you can get the viewer to look through the photograph. Okay, the next one is called harmony. Now, harmony basically is where they have colors that go well together. Either they'll contrast, but they'll still go well together, or else they'll be very much the same, but they'll all complement each other. Same thing with shapes and stuff like that. And so here we have an iceberg, partly submerged, but you can see the reflection, harmony. It just kind of creates a feeling of harmony, just of balance and harmony. Okay. Now here, because we have the repeating pattern of it, we have harmony in it. Repeating pattern, colors that complement each other is just, okay. Same thing here, the reflection of the sky and on the water that's on the beach. Harmony. Now here she's got colors are very close to each other. We have all the repeating lines in the background. It just creates a feeling of harmony. Okay, a lot of repeating again. Okay, this next one that they call avoiding mergers, and I don't know how you shoot avoiding mergers, and so that's when I pulled out of the assignment, because you don't shoot avoiding mergers. But here are some mergers, and so it's just something to look for as you're composing, I guess, of things that you don't want to shoot. So here's an example of a merger, where the bride is now merged into the horse that she's riding upon. So it looks like she's, what are they, a minotaur? I don't know. Anyway, some more mergers. So just kind of keep your eyes open to make sure that you're not lining them up where things are popping out of the top of their heads. I mean, this one could be easily fixed by just moving left or right. You can still have the background in there, but there they are popping out of the top of their heads. Okay, the next one is framing. Now, framing does the same thing as simplicity and emphasis, but because you don't put a lot on the outside, but you put something physical that will cause the subject or cause the viewer to look at your subject. Okay, and you also want to make sure that the frame that you're using complements the story that you're trying to tell. Okay, notice how your eye goes directly to the subject, even though we're talking about framing. Now you're looking at the frame, but when you first start, your eye goes directly to the subject because they're framed, and you look at the subject, and that's exactly what they want to do. Now here, notice how they use the trees to help frame that sunset, and also notice. Well, we'll come back to that in a second. Here's some more. Just beautiful, and they just add to the feeling of it. Okay, rhythm and repetition, and sometimes I call it repetition and pattern, but rhythm and repetition is where it repeats itself. And that's very pleasing to the eye because we see that in nature, we see that we duplicate this a lot as humans in our architecture and lots of things. So rhythm and repetition. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about here is there's rhythm and repetition, but there's times that you're going to want to break the pattern. And so they're breaking the pattern here two different ways. One of them is by the color of the starfish, and the other one is by the shape of the starfish, how it breaks the pattern. And that causes your eye to go directly to it. Again, they're breaking the pattern. So sometimes you want to emphasize the pattern, and here you're emphasizing there's a lot of people there, they're all doing the same thing. But then sometimes you want them to look right at your subject, and your subject is the one that's breaking the pattern. Okay, balance. Now balance basically says that if you have something on one side, it's going to feel kind of lopsided. So you need to put something on the other side to help balance it out. And you can do that with colors. So, lightness and darkness with the values like that, lightness and darkness. You can also do it with just shapes. So here we have this dark upon the white, and here we have it black and goes a little lighter, and they balance each other out. Let's look at some more things of balance. And notice the one on the left, they're shot, it's basically symmetrical, so it's the same on both sides. And then the other one, they put them on one side, and they put the Washington Monument on the other side to help balance each other out. Now both of them are okay. Both of them are good but I prefer the one on the right. Okay, I didn't think balance is my last one, but apparently it is. So we're going to start over at the very beginning. And let's look at this real quick. And now now you know some of the other ones. I want you to look at them, and I want you to look for other things that are inside of these photographs. Because not only does this follow simplicity, but it also follows other things that we've learned. So if you look at that for a second, I'm going to give you just a second to kind of think, what else does that follow? It follows simplicity and emphasis. What's the other thing? The major thing that I see is rule of thirds. Here we also have repetition and pattern, and you're breaking the pattern by having the red one in there. Yeah. Simplicity. Anything else? I'd say rule of thirds is another major one that comes up. Okay, still we have rule of thirds there as well. And you have some pattern because it repeats itself. I would say with that one, we also have leading lines that lead through it. Again, leading lines. Simplicity and emphasis with the rule of thirds. Same thing, simplicity. We have leading lines because the shore, the rocks that go up to it, lead to it. Simplicity with that. because there's not a lot out there to look at besides that. Even though there's some interest there, it still cause your eye to go to your thing. Here we have the rule of thirds, but we also have simplicity, and we have leading lines. Simplicity again with it. We have some repetition and pattern. Some simplicity and emphasis. You'll find that it's kind of a common one. We'll go past the perspectives. Okay, leading lines. There we have some pattern, repetition and pattern. We have leading lines. We have some framing even with this one. Even though they're not completely framed with something closer to us, with him being in the background with the sky and that being blank, it kind of frames him with the rock in the sky to help draw your eye to him as well. Now leading lines, not only do we have the leading lines running up here, but we also have some of the leading lines running down to him to cause our eyes to go to him. Repetition and pattern. Rule of thirds. I see some repetition pattern there as well. I see some simplicity. And so even though we have harmony in these, we have a lot of other things going on in there as well. Okay, some more repetition. Okay, let's go past the avoiding mergers because none of those are really great. And the question is, if you're not seeing anything, like if you're not seeing other things besides the framing, is there anything they could have done better? Could they have done the rule of thirds that would help that look even better than it is? Here we have the framing, but we also have the rule of thirds because you notice how the sweet spot's right here, and this is right where your subject is. Okay, leading lines. These tree branches, the horizon, even the dock, all point back to that. And so it just draws the viewer's attention through it. We also have some simplicity on it because there's not a lot to look at. Well, there is, but it's very simplistic. You're not being distracted over here by a boat, maybe up here by a bird. It just draws your eye right through it. Okay, we also, we have rule of thirds here, of course. We have some simplicity, but the repetition and pattern, yeah. Okay, we have a lot of simplicity. Now, I don't love this one. This shows repetition and pattern and rhythm and repetition. And the leading lines that lead me through it can lead me back to this, but that, to me, is just, it's not a great subject. Unless they were to have turned it over a little bit and use that, put that more on the rule of thirds, I probably would have enjoyed that better, but that's good. Okay, balance. We have simplicity and emphasis going on there. We have the rule of thirds going on there. Okay, we also have some harmony going on there with the colors and okay, we have some simplicity there as well, and emphasis. And this is a great example of balance. It's also a great example of rule of thirds and some leading lines and things like that. Anyway, that was supposed to be the quick version of it, but now you understand that hopefully it'll help you in your endeavors to make your photography better, because that's the goal of the class, is to make your photography better.